When I was around 8 years old, my dad bought several hundred acres in southern Louisiana, about an hour and a half northeast of Biloxi, Mississippi. He built a small cabin on a hill that sat in the center of a wide clearing, surrounded by forest. The cabin was about 5 miles from the nearest paved road. To reach our property, we had to drive close to 10 minutes down winding dirt roads from the highway, which lay to the south of the house. About a quarter-mile north of the cabin, he made a little lake, more like a big pond. It was roughly the length of a football field, maybe even wider. There were 2 ways to reach the lake from the cabin. Route 1 was a well-worn dirt path lined with dogwood trees. It looked amazing in the spring. Roughly 100 yards east of that road was another trail we named Shadow Path, because it always felt dim and eerie. The tree canopy blocked out the sunlight even on the brightest days, and the trail sloped gently as it neared the water. I say walked because you couldn't drive on that path. The woods around both trails were thick and quiet. One fall morning, my parents and younger sister had gone into town to grab ice cream and run errands. The trip usually took them at least an hour and a half. I was 10 at the time, and I figured I'd pass the time fishing while listening to LSU play Ole Mississippi. It was shaping up to be another easy win for LSU. So to break up the boredom, I grabbed my rod, a small radio, and a little cooler. I had a big Airedale Terrier named Duke who never left my side, and that day I found out just how great he really was. Off to the lake we went. Picture an oval-shaped lake, a little bigger than a football field, with an L-shaped dock sitting in the southeast corner. Shadow Path led down a steeper slope toward the shore and the little pier. Across the water, on the west side, there was a narrow line of trees separating the edge of the lake from Dogwood Road. To the north was the dam, and the south side backed into dense, swampy woods. Thankfully for me, I'd realize later how lucky I was. Around 5 minutes after I cast my line, and after LSU scored 2 quick touchdowns, I got that strange feeling. It's one I've come to know well over the years. It might have saved my skin that day. The feeling that something dangerous was watching. Duke must have picked up on it too, because seconds later, I heard him growl low and steady while staring across the lake, toward the treeline that separated the lake from Dogwood Road. I turned my head and locked eyes on what looked like half the shape of a tall man standing behind a tree. It was too far to see clearly, but close enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. A few minutes passed, and just as I was about to chalk it up to my imagination, the figure moved, slowly, behind the tree. Duke's growl got louder. I quietly hushed him and turned my head toward the dam, though I kept my attention fixed on that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt more like hours, I watched that shadowy figure move from tree to tree, always moving north and always facing me. I learned what frozen with fear really meant that day. For some reason, I felt it was important that the figure didn't know I'd seen it. At last, I noticed it was slowly working its way closer to the dam. That would make it easier for it to get to my side of the lake. That broke my freeze. I gently laid my fishing pole down and began walking calmly toward Shadow Path. Years later, I spent over a decade as a military police officer in the Army, but not looking back during that walk was still one of the hardest things I've ever done. In my mind, whatever that thing was had taken off across the dam after me. When I reached the edge of the woods, I broke into a sprint. Duke shot ahead of me but would stop every 20 yards or so, turning to face north until I caught up. He did this all the way back to the cabin. He was guarding my back. It was incredible. Looking back now, I understand how amazing it was. But at the time, I was so shaken I felt sick. Even at that age, I knew a grown man hiding and sneaking up on a 10-year-old kid was serious trouble. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door, grabbed one of my dad's shotguns and his .38 revolver, and sat at the front window, watching both trail openings and the woods between them. My family came back not long after. For some reason, I never told them what had happened. I never really felt safe out there again. Anytime my sister or my friends wanted to go anywhere beyond the area right around the cabin, I insisted that my parents come with us. What creeps me out the most, though, is that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles away, northwest with deep forest in between. Who, or what, was watching me from the trees that day? I guess I'll never really know. Sometimes I wish I could go back as the man I am now, with training and experience, and face whatever it was head on. Duke lived a long, happy life. When he passed, he was old and tired, and we let him go peacefully. He was the best dog I ever had. I live out in the countryside, in a quiet little village where about half the houses are weekend getaways. Not much really goes on around here, but if you're someone who enjoys the outdoors, it's a great place to be. I'm a nature-loving woman, and water has always been my favorite element. I go kayaking, diving, swimming, basically anything that lets me be in or on the water. I was driving home from a night shift. It's just a temporary job I took for the summer, working at a small group home for people in recovery. The place houses 8 residents who are working on getting clean, and there always have to be 2 staff members there overnight, just in case something comes up. Most nights are pretty laid back though. We hang out, play cards, watch a bit of TV, cook dinner together. It's pretty easy work, really. Anyway, I was headed back and, like I often do, I made a stop at this hidden little lake I love for a quick dip. I've always got a swimsuit in the car for moments like this. Can't say no to a swim. The lake isn't big, but it's super clear and surrounded by thick forest. You'd never even know it was there unless someone showed you. The tiny road down to the water is narrow and tucked away, so there's almost never anyone around except maybe someone walking their dog. I had just started swimming out when I noticed the string I used to tie my car key around my ankle didn't feel tight enough. I worried it might slip off and sink. So instead of heading straight into the lake, I swam around this rocky part that juts out. The lake kind of bends into an L shape, and I was in the bend of it, still able to see back toward the beach and my car. As I tightened the key string, I looked up at my car. I was in a spot a little out of sight. Not far, but around the corner enough that I could see the vehicle from the side without being seen easily. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. Then I squinted, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it wasn't my imagination. Crouched beside my SUV was a guy. A guy in a bright yellow sweatshirt I recognized. I couldn't see his face from that distance, but I knew that hoodie. It was Ricky. People at the home called him Creepy Ricky. He was just 18, but mentally unstable and hadn't come back from his visit with his family the day before. We had called the cops, of course, but since he usually turns up again after a few days of using, the police often told us to wait it out. He'd gotten his nickname after a disturbing incident where he attacked a girl with a gardening tool because, according to him, she was too pretty. She wasn't seriously hurt, thankfully, but still, it was terrifying. He had a long track record of violence during drug benders. When sober, he was all right, but under the influence, he was unpredictable and dangerous. I thought about trying to slip out of the lake, head for the main road, and maybe flag someone down. But what if he saw me? What if he chased me? I had no idea how fast he could run, and I was barefoot wearing a bright orange swimsuit. Not exactly easy to hide. The idea of coming face to face with a probably high, possibly armed Ricky was too risky. I thought it over and saw only one real option: swim across the lake to the cluster of summer cabins on the far side. I began swimming, keeping quiet and constantly glancing back to make sure I wasn't being followed. The swim took over an hour and a half, and by the time I reached the far shore, I was freezing and completely worn out. As I stumbled up the sand, a young mom with her 2 kids noticed me. I told her what had happened, and she quickly called the police. She gave me warm scones, coffee, and what might have been the best waffles I've ever had. When the officers showed up, Ricky was gone, and all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I handed in my resignation at the group home soon after, and last I heard, Ricky still hadn't been found. During my summer job working as a camp counselor in the upper regions of Manitoba, Canada, something happened that I still can't fully explain. At the time, I was out on a camping trip with a group of 10-year-old boys, staying by the same lake where the main camp was located. Like any regular trip, we paddled out to the spot in our canoes and got our tents set up. My co-leader, Chris, and I took shifts keeping an eye on the kids while they swam, built forts, played games, and just had fun. We grilled up some food over the fire, shared stories, made s'mores, the usual stuff you'd expect on a Canadian camping trip. Around 9:30 p.m. or so, I told the boys it was time to hit the sack, and they all crawled into their tents. The tents were set up a short walk from the water, but still close enough that we could see them from the fire pit. Once the kids were settled, Chris and I stayed up by the lake, chatting and smoking a cigarette, just hanging out before calling it a night. What happened next still gives me chills, and it's become the one scary story I always tell around the fire. While we stared out across the dark, quiet water, we noticed a dim light moving slowly in our direction, hovering just above the lake's surface. We talked back and forth about what it might be, watching as it drifted closer. Eventually, it got near enough for us to realize it was attached to the front of a kayak. Someone was paddling toward us. I should explain that, as counselors, we're trained on how to handle unexpected visitors, especially since we're responsible for children on open land. I was ready to give the usual talk, that we were there with a registered group and kindly ask the person to choose another site. But as the kayak came into view, I froze. The person paddling was an elderly woman, probably in her mid-60s. Her gray, stringy hair hung so low it dragged in the water. Her skin was leathery and weathered, and her eyes were sunken and lifeless, almost lost in her wrinkled face. When she finally looked straight at me and spoke, I noticed she barely had any teeth. "Are the little ones tucked in safe?" she asked, pointing toward the tents. I had no idea how to respond, and honestly, I was scared stiff. I managed to tell her that everything was fine and she needed to leave. "That's good. Just the way it's supposed to be this evening," she said with a grin. Then she slowly turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At that point, Chris and I were seriously freaked out. Not just because she looked like something out of a nightmare, but because she had asked about the safety and location of the kids. Not sure what else to do, we checked on the boys, then grabbed our knives and stayed by the fire on edge. That's when things got worse. Across the lake, a fellow counselor, Emma, was leading a different trip with kids around the same age. About half an hour later, I got a text from her saying something like, "Dylan, stop messing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are freaked out." I called her right away and told her what had just happened at our site, that we weren't playing any tricks and had seen a strange woman. She went quiet, then told me one of her campers had unzipped their tent to go to the bathroom and saw a woman with long hair standing by the lake, arms stretched out toward them. About 3 years ago, I was walking my dog between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. It was summer, and the only time I could take her out for a walk was at night to avoid the heat. I lived in a quiet little town where nothing much ever happened. Some people were friendly, but I rarely saw anyone out during my nighttime walks. My town had a small lake surrounded by woods. A trail ran through the woods, leading to one side of the lake and then coming out into a large clearing that served as a park, complete with picnic tables, benches, and lights that stayed on at night. You could see the clearing from the other side of the lake, near a smaller opening in the woods. My dog, Luna, loved that trail, so I decided to take her there. When we reached the start of the trail, Luna stopped in her tracks. I called to her softly and asked her to come along, but she wouldn't budge. She wasn't sniffing anything. She was just standing there, staring into the woods, looking scared. Her ears were back, and her tail was tucked down. Luna was usually jumpy about little things, so I assumed she'd heard a noise or was just being overly cautious. I kept trying to coax her forward. She glanced at me when I called her, but mostly, she just froze, staring into the woods. After a while, I managed to get her to move, and we slowly made our way a few feet into the woods. Then Luna stopped again. I was starting to get frustrated. I looked down at her and told her to keep moving. She was still looking towards the lake, looking nervous. I followed her gaze and saw a figure sitting on one of the picnic tables across the lake. It wasn't unusual to see people at the lake, though I had never seen anyone there at night. The person appeared to be dressed entirely in black, with a hood up, sitting with their back to us. I assumed it was a man. I felt uneasy but didn't think much of it. It wasn't that late, and others sometimes enjoyed being outside at night. Luna was always friendly and had never been afraid of people. so I couldn't understand why she was so disturbed. I decided to keep walking through the woods, planning to cut through a less dense part of the trees to head home. I called to Luna again, and she reluctantly moved on. By the time we were in the middle of the clearing, it was pretty dark, with just a street lamp behind us casting dim light. Luna stopped once more, turned to look at the man, and then quickly started pulling back the way we came. Her tail was tucked, ears flattened, and she was panting. I looked across the lake and saw that the man was now facing me. His hood was still up, but I could clearly see his face. He seemed to be staring right at me. I watched him for a few seconds, and feeling anxious, I decided to head back out of the woods. Luna was pulling so hard that I was struggling to keep hold of the leash. She trotted ahead of me until we were about a block away from the woods. Finally, she slowed down. We kept walking, but suddenly she got that same terrified look again. She pulled me down a side street, a shortcut to my house, running as fast as she could. I felt uneasy and glanced behind us. There, standing on the street we had just left, was the man, still in all black, hood up with his hands in his pockets. He was standing at the street corner, smiling faintly. I didn't want to risk looking back again. I hurried towards my house, jogging with Luna. Once we reached the driveway, I let go of her leash, and she ran straight to the backyard. After that night, I still took Luna for walks at night, but I never went back to the lake except during the day. I had nightmares about that man for a while, and it always disturbed me how quickly he managed to catch up to us. There were shortcuts he could have used to cross the lake without taking the long path, but he had made it to the clearing in just a few minutes. He must have been running. I've never seen Luna so scared of anyone before, and she never acted that way again. Last month, my close friend and I, both 24-year-old men, decided to go on a 2-night backpacking trip in the Green Mountains of Vermont. We're both very familiar with the outdoors, spending plenty of time camping, hunting, and fishing. We hiked about 5 miles into a small lake and set up camp on a quiet little beach. This was a remote area, and we didn't expect anyone else to be around. That first night, as we sat by the fire, we noticed a flashlight moving on the opposite side of the lake at around 10:30. This struck us as odd, but we didn't give it much thought at first. However, as time passed, the flashlight continued to circle the lake, drawing closer to our campsite. We kept wondering who might be out in the woods at such a late hour, and we didn't want any unexpected visitors. Once it became clear that the person was heading directly for our camp, we decided to move into the woods nearby to see who it might be. I grabbed a small axe, and my friend took a .22 rifle. We weren't anticipating trouble, but we figured it was better to be prepared. Then, the flashlight came closer and illuminated the firelight. It was just one man. He had a beard and appeared to be in his mid-40s. What made things worse was that he was carrying a pump-action shotgun. He walked around our campsite several times before entering a tent. After rummaging through it for a moment, he stepped out and started shouting, "I know you're out there. Come on out and say hello." My friend and I remained still under a hemlock tree about 50 yards away. Then, the man fired his shotgun into the woods not far from us and started swinging his flashlight all around. After what felt like an eternity, he grabbed my friend's backpack, along with a few clothes drying by the fire, and tossed them into the flames. My friend, holding the .22, asked if he should shoot. I told him not to unless the man spotted us and pointed the gun in our direction. Fortunately, after a while, the man turned and walked back the way he had come. Once his flashlight moved across the lake again, we quickly grabbed everything we could fit into my pack and ran. It was around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning by then. We used our flashlights to guide us and made it back to the trail, eventually reaching my car just as the sun started to rise. We immediately went to the local police station and filed a report, also speaking with some forest rangers. Since then, I haven't heard anything further from the authorities. It wasn't something mysterious, but it was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. Thanks for reading, and if you'd like, you can support me on Patreon for just $1 a month for early access to narrations. Be sure to check out our limited edition t-shirts at t-blaster.com/letsread. All the links are in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. I'm really into exercising, especially lifting weights and running. I usually cover around 12 miles each week, running about 3 miles on 4 different days. Every time I run, I stick to the same trails near the lake in my hometown. These trails are fairly quiet, but you can usually spot a few other runners or people strolling around. Most of the time, I run in the late afternoon or early evening. There's one trail I always go to because it's my favorite, and it's really close to where I live, not even half a mile away. This past week, my gym was closed for renovations, so I ended up running more than usual since I couldn't lift. I doubled my running, but as a result, my tendinitis flared up, which always seems to happen when I overdo it. That'll be important later on. There's this one charming spot on the trail that I need to describe. It's a small picnic area with parking spaces and picnic tables, each equipped with grills scattered around the lakeside. It's a popular spot for families who enjoy grilling. Behind one of the tables, in a quieter section, there's a little dirt path leading to a beautiful cliff overlooking the lake. I've been out here since I was a kid, since it's always felt pretty safe. So, this was my last run before I had to rest my tendinitis. It was getting dark, and I was just about to pass through the park and head home when I reached that park. I stopped, thinking I might go towards my favorite little hidden trail to relax on the cliff. I'm not the paranoid type and usually enjoy an adventure, but after hearing so many stories like this, I decided to pick up my pace a little. I noticed a van parked nearby, but there are often people there, so I didn't think much of it. It might have been a fisherman, so I just kept going. I'm glad I did. The next day, I was in so much pain from my overexertion that I could barely walk, let alone run. I decided to take the morning off. When I woke up, I checked my news app and saw a report saying that the police were investigating a burned body of a woman found at the lake just hours before I had woken up. The article got worse, revealing that the body was burned and gruesomely dismembered. It was found right along my favorite trail, between the picnic area and the cliff, less than a mile from my house. The same area I run through 4 times a week. I had almost gone there the night before, in fact. I've been running there since I was a kid. It's the same trail that has made me feel uneasy after hearing stories like these. It's the same place where I saw that gray van, which I thought nothing of. They're still investigating and haven't caught anyone yet. I'm sitting in my dark house right now, less than a mile from the scene, just hoping they catch whoever did this. I feel so lucky to be safe, and I'm also relieved I wasn't the one to find the body, since that could have easily happened to me. I spend so much time there, and it's so close to my home. I still don't know if that gray van was connected to it, but it feels strange since I know a couple of people who used to run in the area, too, but stopped after noticing that van always driving by whenever they were out there. My family has a cabin by a small lake in Vermont, and we visit there every summer. It's like our second home. There are other lakes around and a few houses, but the area is mostly rural, with miles of forest beyond the lake houses. There's really no reason to be out there unless you're at a lake house or visiting the water for some reason. One night, about 5 years ago, it was late, probably close to midnight, when my ex and I were lying in bed just talking about random things. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the window. The window is about halfway up the wall to the side of the bed, and it opens just at the foot of the bed where our feet are. The ground around the cabin is covered with pine needles, so it's difficult to move quietly, but these footsteps sounded like whoever was out there was trying to be as silent as possible. They seemed pretty close, but we convinced ourselves they were probably just an animal. A couple of minutes passed, and we heard the footsteps again. This time, they were even closer, right outside the window. Whoever it was still trying to be quiet. At this point, we were both starting to feel nervous. Then, to our shock, we saw a hand slowly reaching through the window. We screamed, waking up the whole house, and my parents rushed out of their room. We told them what had happened, and my dad suggested it was just our imagination. But to this day, I'm not sure if he was right. The odd part is, both of us saw the same thing, so how could it be in our heads? I still get uneasy staying in that room, and I always make sure to close the window before going to bed. I began dating my current girlfriend about a year and a half ago, and one evening, I decided to take her to a small lakeside beach in a nearby town. We wanted to talk and watch the stars. After leaving my house, we drove to the lake, parked the car, and walked a short distance, maybe a quarter of a mile, to the beach. We spent some time talking, laughing, and kissing for about an hour. But then, I started to feel a little uncomfortable, which was unusual for me. I glanced up at the tree line along the beach and noticed what seemed like a man standing by a tree, looking at us. I didn't mention anything to my girlfriend, not wanting to alarm her. I kept my eye on him from the corner of my vision and saw that he was slowly getting closer. He was still quite far away, maybe over 100 yards, but then I saw the moonlight reflect off something in his hand. It took me a moment to realize it was a hunting knife. I stayed calm and turned to my girlfriend, telling her we needed to leave immediately. We made our way back to my car, and I kept checking over my shoulder at the man. He never came closer to the road where we were parked. Once we reached the car, she asked what was going on. I told her there was a man with a knife watching us. As I drove away, about 2 minutes into the drive, I called the police to give them a heads up. I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't spotted him and gotten us out of there.